Hey folks, welcome to another episode of 5 to 15 with Musickers. I'm your host, Jason DeCristofaro, and I'm thrilled to be here with my friend, amazing woodwind artist, educator, composer, and arranger, Will Boyd. Will, thanks so much for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. You and I talk all the time. We just nerd out on music stuff for hours about everything. But I want to focus on your work as a woodwind artist. You are one of the most versatile woodwind players I know. You play flute, all the saxophones, clarinet, and bass clarinet. You play all these instruments at a really high level. And the thing that when I've talked to people about your work, they say, how do you find time to do it? So I guess let's start there. What does a typical day for Will Boyd look like?
For me, practicing wise, I kind of have to really narrow in on what I'm going to focus on for that day, usually whether it be flute or clarinet. And right now it's kind of working on the nuances of oboe in particular.
Oh, so you're doing oboe too?
Yeah. In fact, I did a little bit of oboe on my third album on one of the tunes. I did oboe and alto flute.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and so just getting double reed territory there. What are some of the challenges you find moving from each of these instruments to the other? Because there are commonalities between these instruments, but there are also subtle enough differences that there's a challenge.
That is the problem, is when you first pick it up, if you're self-taught, then what happens is you find all the commonalities first, and then you start playing everything like a saxophone. Like I would play flute like it's a saxophone. I play clarinet like it's a saxophone. I play oboe like it's a saxophone. So what the most important thing I could say is just to take lessons with a professional in that field.
That's people who specialize
in those instruments. When I was in grad school, I was self-taught on clarinet and flute, and I ended up, while I was there, I said, well, let me take flute lessons. Let me take some clarinet lessons, and I realized quickly, they're similar, but there's some very distinct differences between each instrument, and that's what makes it cool about them, is their differences. It's like, no, this is not a saxophone. This is a clarinet. There's a lot of similarities, same key, a lot of similar fingerings, but there's some very great differences in between instruments.
Well, the technical aspect, I remember when I was in school, I was able to get, a sound out of most of the woodwind instruments and even play a few scales and things. The one instrument I really wanted to learn that I could never get a sound out of, and it was very frustrating for me, because my favorite was flute. Why is that, I guess? What are some of the challenges you find with flute? Because at least with clarinet and sax, they're very similar, but flute's kind of its own thing in terms of
Yes, because though it's considered a woodwind instrument, it doesn't have a reed.
Right.
One thing, you're blowing across this lip plate, and everything is all about the head joint. It's all about the sound you can get. So once you're able to get that sound, then it's quasi smooth sailing from there.
Yeah, I know for me, just getting the sound.
And it's physics. It's not necessarily, some people think it's pressure or how much air you blow through. No, it's kind of angular stuff. It's just a matter of finding the right angle.
Getting that right spot.
In that right spot.
Getting that right spot. Well, and so you mentioned something, I think, for the woodwind players watching, they know on a basic level, the fingerings are the same for a lot of the instruments, right? But from a musical standpoint, especially because you're a great improviser and you do a lot of gigs where you're in recordings, where you're improvising, do you have a different concept sonically or visually or theoretically or in any aspect when you're moving from one instrument to the other? What are some of your thought process as an improviser when you're moving from one instrument to the next?
Concerned with moving from one instrument to the next is the key, transpositions. If somebody's giving me a chart that's in concert key. Right. Most times things are already transposed for me, so all I have to do is worry about my ideas. And your ideas are going to be your ideas, no matter what instrument you're on. Because a lot of times when I'm at composing or writing stuff or working on any kind of tunes, I'm at the piano. First and foremost.
Yeah.
So that's where it starts. And my bop licks, it doesn't matter. I'm gonna transfer it to any instrument.
Yeah. When you're practicing on the different woodwinds, do you make that part of your practice regimen where you're literally going through licks or patterns or things like that and kind of systematically going through them? Or
a little bit more. If it depends on how proficient I am on that instrument. If it's like the saxophone stuff, most likely I'm going to be doing more licks and transcribing. Whereas clarinet and flute and maybe definitely oboe, just more etudes and just scales exercise, just getting my fingers used to certain patterns that are different than what's on the saxophone, because you can easily trip yourself up if you start looking for those saxophone fingers that aren't even there.
Right. Well, I'm thinking especially between the clarinet and the saxophone, there's enough subtle things. Out of all the woodwind instruments, which would say, and this is probably difficult, it's like asking to pick your favorite child, but do you have a favorite instrument out of all of them?
I think I like my alto the best out of all of them. And it's not that I like alto better than anything. It's just that particular instrument.
Yeah.
Like it's a particular brand that I like. That's all. It's vintage and it's fun to play.
The sound and the feel of it and all that. Yeah. What advice would you give? Because there's a lot, you teach also, you're a prolific educator, you teach at many institutions and you work with many students. And I guess you get a lot of students from time to time who are like, I just want to do sax, I just want to do clarinet, I just want to do flute. What would be, beyond the obvious benefit of you get more work and more opportunities, from a musical standpoint, what would be some of the benefits of learning more than just one woodwind instrument?
The benefit is that it causes you to think outside the box, in the sense that you're trying something kind of weird. What would be weird to you as a saxophone player playing a clarinet or a flute or a double reed, and you're like, well, I wonder if this would work for saxophone.
Yeah.
And then you go back and transfer it, and most likely it will. And then you're like, oh, sonically, I've created this weird kind of crunchy, funky sound that I can use for whatever type of music that I'm about to play.
Absolutely. And there's a time management aspect too. I mean, what are some tips you would give to somebody, let's say they're a music education major, for example, and they're already doing methods classes and other instruments, philosophy of music, do gen ed courses, they barely have time. What's some advice you would give them in your experience about how to navigate and just make it practical and possible even to practice all these instruments? What are some tips or strategies you would
practically is that you need to really kind of not get bogged down in any particular lesson at a time. When you're doing your scales, just not necessarily rush through them, but don't just kind of beat yourself over your head, over and over again with one scale that's difficult. You need to move up. You got to kind of stop yourself. There's a good book out there by Jerry Coker that's just talking about the art of practicing.
Yep.
And he talks about that, like your mind is only going to concentrate but for so long. And if you stay on something too long, then your mind's going to wander and you're going to get distracted. You're not going to accomplish anything.
That's a great book.
In fact, he says the ideal time to practice is like 30 minutes on, then take a break. Then do 30 minutes again, then take a break. And in that 30 minutes, 5 minutes for scales, 5 minutes for A2, 5 minutes for this, and just kind of just keep shooting at it. Almost like, just like a workout.
Absolutely.
I don't do that, but it is great.
What do you do?
No, once I get on the rabbit hole, especially with scales, I'm a big scale person, so once I started, I have to go through all of them in all 12 keys. It just makes life easier, especially getting everything in your fingers.
Was that the case when you started out on the instruments, or?
Not necessarily when I started out. My high school band director was big on sight reading, so he always had his sight reading stuff all the time, which none of us like to do it, but it really paid off, in the end. And I realized, once I got better at doing my scales, I was like, oh, that's what I need. It's more scales I do, the easier this gets. Scales and arpeggios, just over and over again, and then it makes it so much easier to get through a lot of these pieces.
As you've played over the years, because you're an arranger and composer, you've released several albums, and you write music in educational settings and concert settings. As you've played these different instruments more and more, do you start to hear these different sounds in your arranging process? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, you can kind of, when you're writing here, the flute is going to sound good here, or in this range, or the Barry sax would be a terrible idea for this particular tune in this particular range, unless I rewrote it, and it'd be like, this would be a crazy key to do this in, because it's going to cause you actually troubleshoot in your head before you even get to putting the music on paper or computer or whatever, and it saves you so much time. Right on. Well, Will, thank you so much. Before we go, how can people find out about you and your music and your various projects? Well, I'm on social media. I have an Instagram. I think it's like will.boyd. I'm on Facebook, but I also have a website, willboydonsax.com. Usually I try to keep up with my calendar with all the events and things coming up. Awesome. Will, thank you so much. Thank you. Yeah. Have a great day, y'all.